Heavenly Father, thank you for assembling us here today. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss improvement to the city of Lancaster and to be able to make decisions that ultimately glorify you and make this a better place to live. I pray for the families of Fred Hand, Lord. Just lift them up during this time, and thank you for his service to this community, and know that he's definitely remembered and a valued part of our community, Lord. In your name, amen.
Amen. Face the flag, hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. May we have the roll call, please?
Commissioners Diana Cook.
Present.
Cassandra Harvey.
Present.
Raj Mali.
Present. I said present.
Thank you. Fabian Terracino.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan Christ.
Present.
Vice Chair Randy Hall.
Here.
Chairman James Vose.
Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Public business from the floor. If an individual is unable to stay through the entire meeting, 2 minutes is offered at this time. If you care to discuss an agenda item with us. Do we have any early speakers?
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right, then. Any person who would like to address the commission on any agendized item is requested to complete a speaker's card for the recording secretary and identify the agenda item you'd like to discuss. Once we call that item, each person will be given an opportunity to address the commission at the time the item is called. For your information, applicants are given a deference of whatever time they wish to express their proposed application and whatever time is necessary for them to share that information with us, should they care to offer any testimony. Otherwise, individual speakers would be limited to 3 minutes each. For the record, we've received a number of corrections to our agenda, or additions, I should say, of items. On item number 2, conditional use permit 14-03, a staff report modification on pages 2 and 3, our resolution for that item on page 2, item number 4, and on the condition list, condition number 5. On agenda item number 3, conditional use permit 1406, the staff report on page 3 in the second paragraph has been modified, and the condition list, conditions number 5, 6, and 7. First item on our agenda is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of May 19, 2014. May I have a motion, please?
I make a motion that we approve minutes from regular meeting of May 19, 2014.
Thank you.
I second that.
Thank you. Any discussion, questions, comments? Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. The next items before us are new public hearings. So without objection, the public hearings are open on conditional use permit number 1403. The applicant is Tesoro Refining and Marketing Company for a project, an addition of a Type 20 off-sale beer and wine. So,
Chairman Walsh, is it appropriate to recuse myself because the location is in less than half a mile from my business?
certainly,
Thank you.
you're excused. So, for the record, Commissioner Malley has recused himself on this matter, so the 6 of us then will decide. May we have a staff report, please?
Good
Good evening, Chairman Vos, Commissioners. This conditional use permit is a request for the addition of a Type 20 ABC license to an existing, it's the Shell gas station located on the corner of Avenue J8 and 20th Street West. There is also requests to be exempt from the distance requirements for the sale of alcohol. And in the staff report, you can see that while the distance between the nearest residential property is less than the required 300 feet, the actual distance to travel is much greater than that. So staff felt that it was okay to recommend waiver of the requirement. The other notable condition that I should bring up is that staff is conditioning that the maximum square footage for the sale and display of alcohol be limited to 100 square feet. The floor plan actually only shows 36 square feet of display area for alcohol, and we wanted to keep it to a lot less than the 10% that's allowed by code. So, given these conditions, staff feels that the Commission could recommend approval for this conditional use permit. And I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you. There may be some. Members?
On the modifications, the uncontested letter includes the modifications. That Tesoro Refining said that they would agree to it. I was just curious if they agreed to the original as it was written, or to the ones that's been modified. The modified conditions.
Anyone else? So, is the applicant here and wish to present? If so? And could you introduce him, Mr. Ludicky?
Mr. Ahmad Gaderi.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, sir, and welcome.
Good afternoon, sir. Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission, thank you for your time. I want to thank staff for the great work that they've done guiding us through this process. I'm just here to answer any questions you might have, and to answer Commissioner Hall, the letter that we submitted was based on the revised document that staff provided us last week. So, again, I'm here to answer any questions, and we agree with all the conditions.
There may be some, sir. This is a company store, right?
Yes, sir.
It is. And the sale and display, so what do you do with the back stock?
Well, of course, the majority is in the back of the cooler, so you don't have any extra stock that's behind the storage. Most of the area is in the cooler for storage, and the display area is limited to 100 square feet, so we don't really have, floor area where we stack it up. We're limited to the square footage as is stated in the staff report.
You understand the way our ordinance is written, it's the square footage of the floor area. There's no vertical restriction, which I personally take issue with, but at any rate, that's the way it's written.
We'll comply with the requirements as your code requires.
It's a very small
area.
Square footage, that's for sure, and a couple of racks and a cooler, and that's about it.
That's basically it. We're based, as staff indicated, we probably, I don't know, just looking at the doors, probably maybe 2 or 3 cooler doors and just a small, half gondola.
You do understand the restriction for single beverage sales and sizes
Yes, sir.
of single beverages have to be over 40 ounces?
Yes, sir. We, in fact, had a discussion.
Not 40 ounces or under, it's over 40?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We had a discussion with the staff, and they clearly indicated that the pattern has been to make sure that the restrictions are the same, so we agree to those conditions.
All right. And the fortified beverages aren't approved under your conditional use permit? You understand that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We have reviewed
Very
the
good.
conditions.
Just for the record, we just make sure.
We have read the conditions, and I agree.
We rarely have issues with company stores, but
No,
it doesn't hurt to ask.
No problem, sir. I understood. It's a company store run by a great operator that has multiple locations with Tesoro, and I had them review the conditions, and they agreed with the conditions as stated currently.
Very good. All right, anyone else have any questions? Go ahead.
Will there be any special training for the cashiers to make sure that they spot underage or will card? And do they have any special training to make sure they don't sell to people that are obviously intoxicated? Or
Yes, sir. In addition to Tesoro having a rigorous training procedure for all their operators, the operator that runs this facility has multiple locations with Tesoro, and he's got a number of facilities with similar licenses, and he's got a rigorous training procedure. And also their POS, point of sale equipment, also has mechanism where it basically alerts the cashier right away, no matter whether you look 50 or, saying to double check the ID and make sure that they're in compliance with all the requirements of ABC and the city. Their point of sale equipment is set up as such that it will trigger the requirements for the driver license and all the ID requirements. Yes, sir.
What do you card at, what, 30 and under, or 30?
Everybody.
Everybody, just card everybody?
Just everybody.
Even an old person like me?
My apologies, but we have to. That's the requirement.
There. All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
That's it? Very good. Thank you, sir, for your comments. Anyone else or any other speakers? Mr. Ludicky?
I have no other cards, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments from the members? No? All right, then, so it's appropriate to close the public hearing on this matter without objection and consider a motion as recommended.
I move to adopt resolution number 14-06, approving conditional use permit number 14-03.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Thank you. Ready to vote? Please vote.
Motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Malley recusing himself.
All right, thank you very much. Good luck, thank you. Next item is item number 3, which is conditional use permit 1406, and for the record, the public hearing is open on this matter without objection. The applicant is Emily Julian, and this is for an expansion of tenant space for a banquet facility with on-sale beer and wine and entertainment, as I recall from the staff report. So, hearing is open, and shall we have a brief staff report on this?
Good evening, Chair Voss and Commissioners. Before you tonight, conditional use permit number 14-06. This is a request to expand Giuliani's alcoholic beverage control, type license 41 for beer and wine, and banquet use, and it would be expanding to the just adjacent tenant space. In addition, the applicant is requesting to utilize their ABC license to include the enclosed outdoor patio area. Giuliani's existing CUP 13-08 already includes on-sale beer and wine and live entertainment, and this would replace the existing CUP, and the new conditions of approval for the banquet use have been incorporated with the existing approved conditions. That banquet facility would host various types of private events, such as wedding receptions, birthdays, and other similar meeting type events. The project is not intended to be an entertainment venue such as a nightclub, and a condition has been included that would prohibit the facility to operate as such. Live guitar music and live bands performed for the dining patrons would be allowed on the existing indoor stage and in the outdoor area as well. The hours of operation for the restaurant is 7:30 a.m. to 1 a.m. Banquet space would maintain the same closing hours. The alcohol use is incidental off-sale, and the restaurant is the primary use, therefore it is exempt from the distance requirements. Staff received notice that the Sheriff's Department does not oppose the applicant's request, and the use would not be detrimental to public safety. Staff recommends the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 14-07, approving ABC license type 41, live entertainment and banquet use located at 44960 Valley Central Way, Suites 103 and 108, subject to the conditions of approval. That concludes staff's presentation. Staff is available for any questions.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? We have an applicant on this.
We may, but I have no cards.
I see. All right. So if the applicant is here and wishes to address us, you're certainly welcome to.
Hi, sir. I'm here to answer any questions. My wife is listed, Emily Julian. She had to go to L.A., so I came straight from work.
So you got
I brought
elected.
my kids as my backup just in case it got rough in here.
So for the record,
Actually, the other day, I recognized you now when you came in. Nice to see you. Any questions you have, I'm here to answer them.
for the record, what's the name of your children?
11 years old, 7-year-old, soon to be 8, Ariana. We have 5 girls, 2 to 15. 2 are at home with a babysitter. The other ones are down in L.A.
Congratulations.
Thank you. All Giuliani's folks.
That's great. We have a great store, and we appreciate your being here tonight. There may be some questions for you. I don't know. Anyone? Go ahead.
Well, we talked about music, live or otherwise. Is that amplified, non-amplified?
Both.
What type of feedback have you gotten from the neighbors?
We're in the corner, tucked in the back, and when let's see, the outside is 7:30 to 10, and the businesses are closed around me, and I'm inside that compound.
Okay.
So I haven't heard any complaints from the businesses. The only one that I know that it's open is, I believe, the dialysis, Monster Fitness on the other end, Korean barbecue, the Chinese, I'm not sure of their name, the Chinese restaurant on the corner, and there's a nightclub, I believe, across the way.
Okay.
But I have received no complaints. From the patrons, yes. They want that acoustical inside, so we tried to separate it. So the dining folks could have the nice acoustical, and outside, if it's louder, or if it's a 3-person band, a jazz band, and sometimes we have country bands, we keep them outside.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? All right. Go ahead.
Indoor entertainment, you're going to be doing karaoke and DJ. You're not going to be hosting that out on the patio, are you?
No. You're talking about the new room next door, 108?
No, I'm talking about the patio itself.
Yeah, we don't have any karaoke whatsoever. In fact, I don't believe we even had a DJ there. Now, for the receptions inside the new room and in the back banquet rooms, we've had DJs for that.
Okay.
But they're separated from the dining area.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Unless you want karaoke, I'll have it there for you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Is that it? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Christopher, I think at our staff briefing last week, you mentioned that you circulated notices to the adjacent tenants in the facility.
Actually, Emily did that, and I did talk to her, and she said she didn't hear any negative feedback or comments or anything like that.
All right.
She said everyone sounded pretty positive.
Good. Yep. Thank you. All right, then. Any other questions or comments from anyone? It'd be appropriate then to close the public hearing without objection and consider a motion on this matter.
I make a motion that we adopt resolution number 14-07, approving conditional use permit number 14-06.
Thank you.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Great. Congratulations. And best of luck. You've got a successful store there.
Trying. Hope to see you all there. I've seen a few of you there, and I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. All right. Next item is item number 4, which is the transit-oriented development TOD zones. This is a matter that's been recently introduced to us, and this is a public hearing, so without objection, this item is open for hearing. Mr. Ludicky?
Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, this is the Transit-Oriented Development Draft document that was presented to you a couple of months ago in form of an introduction about the location that it would cover, the approach that was taken in the development of the document, and what it would do if in fact adopted. It has since that time been recommended to you by the Architectural and Design Planning Commission. They made a positive recommendation on it. At our study session, as the Commission requested that the consultant that the city used in the preparation of the document be available for questions, discussion, or anything that may be relevant as you consider both the content of the document and any public comment that you may get on it. So Mr. David Sargent from Sargent Downtown Planning and a member of his staff are available for you this evening, and we also have the draft document available on the computer screen if there's a particular page that you want to get to and have a question about. So with that as a bit of a background, I'll turn it over to Chris and Mr. Sargent if they have any opening statement that they would like to make on it, or if the Commission has questions or anything in particular they'd like to know about it at this point.
Go ahead.
I stopped Mr. Sargent in the foyer out there and talked to him for a few minutes about some of the highlights, so I just wanted to inform everybody.
All right, thank you. Staff, have anything to add to Mr. Ludicky's presentation before we...
No, not at this time.
All right, thank you. The recommendation before us is to receive public testimony and to provide comments, questions, and direction to staff. I do not see any public for the public testimony opportunity. However, it's been our practice in the past when we have zone changes and general plan amendments that we take a bit of time to review the documents before us, and we solicit input from those affected stakeholders within the community. I know that, as you pointed out, Mr. Ludicky, that ADC has vetted this over a long period of time, and and their meetings have been published and are televised. Mr. Sargent is here tonight and his associate. We appreciate that. However, I'm not sure if there are any questions or comments that need to be directed to you, sir. So I'll leave that to the Commission, and we'll see where it takes us. Anyone?
Well, I have a few notes. On the page, it's in the beginning, Article 1 in general. It says, as used in the title, TOZ zones mean SA, CC, EC, WD, and etc. And it took me a while to find out what those were, so I did figure them out, but I just thought maybe that might be better explained there. Do you want me to just go through all of them?
You go right ahead and go through everything you're...
On page 3, there's a bunch of adjectives that describe Lancaster as a more sustainable, livable, walkable, bikeable, and valuable community, and I just thought maybe enjoyable might go there too.
With all those wonderful attributes that ought to be enjoyable.
Yes. On page 4, it says provide a third one down, provide attractive, memorable, tree-lined streets to provide comfortable environments for pedestrians, cyclists, transit riders, etc. And I was wondering why it didn't say anything about Xeriscape. That's on page 4, third bullet point.
Number 3?
Yes. Page 4. I just thought I didn't see anything in there that said about trying to provide drought-tolerant, resistant type of stuff, and it just seems that that might ought to be included there.
What do you think about that?
I think it's good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I think that's a perfectly good idea. So you're talking about number 3 there, what's talking about the tree-lined streets?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it would be appropriate to adjust the wording there to just say something about
Drought-tolerant.
climate-appropriate landscape and drought-tolerant and climate-appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good comment. Thank you.
Jumping through onto page 20, it was talking about up at the top, quarter commercial CC zone, number 3 also.
Oh, about the encroachments?
Yes, and we just recently did a temporary sign ordinance for the boulevard. I'm wondering if we could use that there for temporary signage.
What do you think, Brian? That's an administrative matter. I'd like to hear Mr. Luedekes.
We could certainly take a look at that. The signage policy that actually exists downtown was developed in conjunction with the Boulevard Association down there, but I don't see any reason why it couldn't be a starting point. Obviously, it's designed to kind of function in a pedestrian-oriented environment where you're trying to communicate better with a pedestrian scale of development and use as opposed to 50-mile-an-hour automobile traffic. So I think there may be usable components out of it, but I wouldn't say that you could necessarily take it and just pull it over verbatim. I think there might be some issues with that.
I was just trying to reduce the number of regulations type of stuff and make them more conforming across all the different types of ordinances that we have.
While you're on that subject and digress to the boulevard, I noticed some of the pedestrian-oriented signage recently tend to be multiple as opposed to single. I don't know if you've noticed that as well, but it seemed rather cluttered to me. Just my point of view. I don't know if that...
Are you talking about projecting blade signs that come off the face of the building
like
above or
the A-frame signs on at pedestrian level on the sidewalk?
Ones. Yeah.
Or in the landscape buffer or whatever. I don't think our downtown ordinance allows more than one, and they're not supposed to block the pedestrian right-of-way, but I've noticed individual operators with multiple signs, so I'd just caution against that in this particular case. But you were talking about the projected,
I was thinking about the temporary signs, the A-frame style, because
if we're not talking about the signs that are building-oriented that...
So you're talking about the little A-frame guys that sit on the sidewalk.
The temp signs, yes.
Because those are a type that are identified in here as being allowed at retail frontages, but we could certainly add something about the number of those per business, or something about the spacing along the sidewalk, like not more than one every 20 or 25 feet, or a number that seemed
I'm not sure that, personally, if one is more than one is appropriate.
More than one per business.
Yeah.
Right, and business, right, and the spacing of businesses varies some too. Some of the shops are real narrow, so.
The frontages of the types of business we're anticipating are relatively small to the streetscape. I mean, they might be 25, they could be as large as 50 feet long.
Right.
One A-frame sign for a pedestrian seems to me to be adequate.
I would agree. In the context, I'm not addressing your existing situation on the boulevard so much as I am thinking about what this would direct going forward.
Would you agree with that?
I think that idea is to try to make it as conforming as we can from the boulevard down through Yucca and everything else. So as people enjoy the boulevard, they'll enjoy the rest of it, and I would kind of like to see that flow out. That was...
Conformity.
Well, if we're going to go across the railroad tracks, we're going to go across the railroad tracks. It's going to be different, but there should be a similar type of thing, similar type of sign ordinance.
Okay. Okay, so we'll put in here, we'll work it out with you, Brian, but I would think...
Yeah, we can provide you what those guidelines are. Take a look at them and see how they could be incorporated.
Cool. We'll do that. Thank you.
Should we move on to the
Go
next
ahead.
one?
Yeah, sure.
On page 33, it's table 2.5, in required parking, again, number 3. I'm hitting home runs on 3s here.
Big on 3, yeah?
Yeah. Multifamily residential is talking about the number of parking spots per unit. I'm just thinking multifamily in 1 seems like there's awful few parking spot required. 1.25 per unit.
Oh, for a one-bedroom?
1.75 per unit for a 2-bedroom single-family house, 1 per unit. Duplex, triplex, quadplex, 1 per unit, so that could be a total of 4 in a quadplex. It just seems like that's a small amount for multifamily. I mean...
Wait a minute, what's this? Single-family residential.
I think it impacts density is the reason for it. I mean, the lot yield is important, and it's limited to what, 5 stories, and for single, or not single family, but multifamily is 5 stories, I think.
Yes.
So
you could have 20.
You could have, depending on the square footage of the lot and how it's developed. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily all be surface parking. I mean, tuck under could be all sorts.
Could be structured. And the lots that are on the west side of Yucca, for instance, close to the station and running on up the east edge of the tracks, as I think illustrated before, those lots are very deep. So we've illustrated the idea of doing fairly intense buildings on Yucca, but with the possibility of very large parking areas behind them to accommodate parking suitable for the height. The other reason for that relatively low ratio, and we can certainly discuss, of course we can discuss that, was because this is near transit. The notion was to get to have an ordinance that would allow people to choose to live with lower parking ratios if they're able to organize their lifestyle more around walking and transit, and as opposed to if these buildings were out closer to the edge of town or somewhere that there were not alternatives to driving. But it's been our experience that in places where these low parking ratios are allowed, usually a developer of multifamily housing is going to want to provide more parking than your minimum, simply because in their experience often they need to offer 1.5, 1.75, 2 parking spaces per unit in order to lease the units. So the question is whether you as the city want to require that higher parking ratio, or do you want to just allow the market to either choose less or choose more?
So I might be misunderstanding it then. This is just a minimum guideline.
Yes, sir.
So they could have as many as they want.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, there are some jurisdictions where people, well, like in some cities, like Portland, for instance, and San Francisco, where they'll establish a maximum that you're allowed to, you're not allowed to provide to. That is not the proposal here.
Okay.
This is just the minimum parking standard.
So, any other comments? While we're going through this, I mean, if anyone else wants to jump in on these issues, please feel free to do that. So as a comparison, may not know the answer today, but some of the multifamily projects that were developed downtown, adjacent to the boulevard, typical non-subsidized units, non-senior units, I won't say non-subsidized, non-senior units. What type of parking ratios did we allow there?
The downtown
Answer tonight, unless you know.
No, I've got it.
Why am I not surprised, Brian?
Well, yeah. The downtown specific plan is very straightforward. It simply says for residential units, it's 1 per unit. That's the requirement. But to Mr. Sargent's point, we've had projects developed downtown anywhere from that minimum 1 space to, if you look at the Sagebrush project, I think it actually provided close to 2 to 2.5. But in fairness, part of that parking was designed to provide an area for the commercial fronting uses that are just north of it. But yeah, residential developers, they tend to know what the market demands in the form of parking. Our intent is to make sure that there's at least a certain amount of on-street or off-street parking that's provided. If they wish to provide more and that works within their pro forma, I don't have any objection to that.
You pointed out, Mr. Sargent, that the west side of Yucca, adjacent to the station in that strip, if you will. What type of buffering, if any, are suggested in this plan relative to the railroad right-of-way adjacent to the parking or adjacent to the proposed housing? What type of a buffer?
In terms of noise separation, there's a setback. You might correct me on this if I'm wrong. In general, we're expecting that the types that are identified for that are either the vertical mixed use or straight apartment buildings, which are generally 65 feet deep or so. Those lots are about 200 feet deep. So that automatic, and the zoning requires that most of the building be built along Yucca, not back along the tracks with parking along Yucca. The other type that's identified for that area is the courtyard types, where the back face of the building could slide back closer to the tracks, but the building's bent around, defining a courtyard space fronting Yucca, which would be rather heavily noise protected by its geometry. And at that point, the environmental review requirements would, and a noise study that would be associated with permitting of buildings in that situation, would require that you probably have double or triple pane windows on the side facing the tracks, and there'd probably be a requirement for ventilation systems that would allow, well, you're going to have ventilation systems anyway because it gets so hot and so cold, so that you would be able to live in a residence there with the windows toward the tracks closed most of the time. That would be my expectation based on the environmental review process.
Yes, and looking ahead, if that corridor gets used for high-speed rail, which is a potential, obviously the noise factor would have to be considered in the design of any individual project within proximity of that.
Yeah, the noise model for the high-speed rail is, at least the ones I've seen, indicate that their impact is less than you would get from a typical ground-level Union Pacific freight.
Yeah.
And that's what they claim. I don't know, but and it's a much shorter duration.
Well, they're not as heavy, and the tracks, because of the speeds, the tracks have to be a lot smoother. If they were going that fast on UP tracks, they'd fly off.
They wouldn't be on them.
And I think the most likely geometry for this that we've seen would be that it's likely to be up in the air and with essentially sound walls on the sides.
Right.
So it may look a little odd, but the intention is that it generate noise going sort of up
I
a
know
lot more than down and out.
we've had a discussion before, and I can't remember when or in what venue, but in a lot of jurisdictions around the country, there are quiet zones adjacent or in downtown areas
Right.
where there's a reduced speed for rail traffic, as well as no horns,
Right.
no bells, none of that. Now, I know you have to negotiate it with Burlington Northern or whomever,
Yeah.
but it can be done and is done in a lot of jurisdictions around this country.
There's some very specific requirements the Public Utilities Commission has for that, having to do with limiting at-grade crossings and then providing additional signals and crossing arms. You need separate crossing gates for pedestrians.
Right.
So it's expensive.
And we don't have that here.
No. But it can
So how
be
do we
done.
get it without spending money we don't have?
Get the high-speed guys to put it in when they jam their train through here.
Good answer.
Is this,
If and when, huh? Go ahead.
is the noise stuff supposed to be in this TOD document, or is that just part of the regular zoning regulations?
Yes, it's part of the normal, actually, it's part of the normal general plan, which does actually factor the noise from the railroad. And then there's standards that are contained within the city's general plan noise requirements that you would then have to evaluate as part of any environmental review of a specific project that were to be built in accordance with these requirements.
Satisfies me.
Go ahead.
Page 39, and finally going to jump to a B.
You sure you don't want to go to a C?
Well, just for a B.
All right.
And then the first one, it says mechanical, electrical equipment, antenna, satellite dishes, garage door motors shall be mounted or otherwise be screened from public view. What popped into my mind when I read that was the dish. And I've seen the dish hanging outside of our buildings and stuff, where we have this beautifully designed building, but then there's dishes hanging all over it. Is that what you're trying to hide here? Is that, or is that going to have to be permitted, the dish? I mean, you're going to get some guy that's going to install it, he's just going to hang it on the outside of the building. And so my question was...
That's the
For the
intention.
balcony or whatever, yeah.
And my question was, is how in the world are we going to do that?
How are you going to control it?
Yeah, how can we control that? Is it just a general idea, we put it there and we hope it happens, or, I don't see how that's controllable.
Yeah, we would certainly want to have that as a part of any initial plans, but I understand that tenants, quite often, they say, I'm getting DirecTV or I'm getting whatever, and then it gets installed on a balcony. I've seen them installed on a balcony or other locations. We would use the language to try to minimize, to the extent that we can, that facing, the public street. But, yeah, there's going to be situations where, maybe we can negotiate size versus other things. At least they've become smaller over time.
How about if we had a requirement in there that said new construction had to have a hidden dish that fed all the units?
I have never seen that. I don't know.
I don't know enough about the technology to tell you anything about it. Yes, do you?
Having had satellite, it's not just, they just slap it on one side of a building.
Right.
There is a certain feed for the satellites. They have to point it at a certain angle to get reception.
Yes.
So I'm afraid if we make that too specific, that's going to probably be an issue for tenants down the line.
Well, I understand this is just something that we're going to try to shoot for. I mean, the whole idea is to make it livable, walkable, enjoyable, and all that, and this here kind of fits in line with that.
Well, if there's a new this is just me thinking, not a system we have worked out, but it would seem to me that if new multifamily buildings, if you require that new multifamily buildings have cabling or conduit running from the roof of the whole building to each unit, then conceivably the dishes could be mounted up on a roof like that, and then they could just pull the cable down to the unit in question. Because if there isn't such a thing, then you just got to sort of bolt the antenna onto the outside of that unit and poke a hole in the wall.
I was just not wanting this architectural wonder that we're going to put up suddenly be polluted with a rabbit ear.
Well, I'll commit. We will take a look at what provisions there may be for that, but
I don't know if there's been any other jurisdictions that have looked at that issue and been able to tackle it.
Well, we'll do a little quick research, but I'm not aware of a solution.
I know we've had issues, and we've discussed among ourselves, switchgear hanging on the outside of very attractive, what we thought were very attractive buildings, and it turns out that, you've got your 4,000 volt switchgear hanging out on the side of a commercial development, and it looks like, doesn't look very attractive. So I'm assuming from this dissertation that we're attempting to prevent that sort of thing.
Yes, because particularly you have a pattern in this part of town where there's a lot of alley-served or other sort of rear-served buildings, and they're requiring that the plans orient those equipments, those service entrances to the rear is a practical situation, as opposed to a suburban pattern where there's no alleys and the only way to come in is from the street. So boom, your front yard is full of green boxes. And so I think that should go a long way to that. But then the sort of user-added systems like a satellite dish is another level of complexity beyond, say, the power service.
Yeah, the problem with satellite dishes, having experience with multi-unit buildings, tenant moves out, another tenant moves in, the satellite company wants the equipment back, but they leave the dishes.
Oh.
That's the problem that we're experiencing when you have turnover with tenants. But to answer Randy's question, what we've been doing is attaching addendum to the lease that the tenants are not allowed to affix anything to the building, which includes satellite dishes. That's one way to handle it. I know the satellite company is trying to come up with some type of universal dish that they can mount on each property, so that when you have the turnover, you don't have these god-awful, ugly dishes.
Then you can just have a switchboard somewhere, and they can, like telephone service, where you can plug them and unplug them.
Because we purchased a building, I literally had to go up and take, I had 10 non-functioning, dishes up there that...
Well, the dishes are expensive, and paying somebody to climb all over the building is expensive. So.
But you figure they reuse them, but they don't.
We'll see if they're. We'll take a quick look and see if somebody's got some language that would be worth considering. We'll let you know what we see.
Well, as you've attempted to do with the ADC, is to make these projects aesthetically pleasing, and that's really what our motive is as well. So it's very challenging to try to flesh all this stuff out and clearly understand, because future technology, we just don't know.
Right. Well, it's like having a building pre-wired. Well, like with what?
Yeah, is it Cat 5 or Cat 6
or
Cat 92?
Or coax,
who knows?
But somehow connecting the units to the roof with conduits would be...
And some method of shielding on the roof that your air handler isn't sticking 6 feet up above the shielding, for instance, or 2 feet or 3 feet like we've experienced in the past, where we've conditioned projects. However, oh my God, they changed suppliers and the air handler's 3 foot higher in our screening and we can't take it down because, and all the excuses.
Right. And sometimes
I personally don't buy any of those excuses, but there they are. Go ahead.
As I was digging through, I noticed all the different pictures of the housing and stuff. Page 53 is a good example. I didn't really notice that there was any type of standard that you were pushing for. There's just many different styles. Is that normal for a document like this?
Well, it depends on the context, but normally we try to stay away from dictating style, and really the illustrations such as these are intended to suggest a variety and a range of sort of regionally appropriate or regionally meaningful styles, but to not require or limit them explicitly, unless somebody has a particular
I did have further on in here, I didn't mark it, but you made me think of where you were showing roof lines.
Oh.
And that would have to have sort of a standard style then to make the massing of one building not overwhelm another one, where you even showed a large two-story house next to a single-story house, but then they had a single story on the two-story house that went next to it, so it looked like it flowed better. So I think that was my question on the standards is are we going to have anything, how are we going to make that roof line thing work out that you were talking about?
I think what we weren't attempting here, and that's why we called them design. We might actually change the name of these. We call them design and performance standards. It might be appropriate to call them design and performance guidelines. Since you have the Design and Architectural Review Committee who look at individual development proposals, the intention of this language here is not so much to create a regulation about what the eave height should be as it is to sort of point out the potential sort of unnecessary differences between your neighbors and your building.
Page 126 is the eave height.
Yes, I saw. Yes, so it's pointing out that if there is a dominant pattern along the street that you're building on, that establishes that each building, for instance, the upper left one there, the left building and the right building are, well, the left building's a one-story and the right building's a two-story, but it's a two-story that has some one-story element. And I could even imagine that even if that left side of the right building there didn't have a one-story roof, if the house was fully two stories, but if it had a one-story porch, for instance, then there would be some commonality rather than just 1, 1, 1, 2, and then 1, 1, 1.
So that's what this document's trying to do is give us the commonality. The word that Commissioner Cook used was cohesiveness, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I was pointed out we have many different styles.
Yes.
But is there like a cookbook of architecture somewhere that will show these types of things to the developers in the future, or is the city going to be watching this, or how does this document here address that, other than just point it out?
That's mainly all it's doing at this point, is pointing out that if there is a predominant pattern along the street that you're working in, where all the buildings have something obvious in common, like one-story pieces, that as you add a new building, having some reference, having some one-story piece, whether it's a porch or a little wing or a lower roof that the building goes up behind, would be a way of, it's not so much matching, it's really about just not having gratuitous differences that you didn't need to have, so that to have something in common with what's around it.
Like the upper right-hand one has completely unmatching, doesn't fit into the neighborhood.
Yeah, it's just a lot bigger. I mean, it's a nice-looking building. Well, it's a pretty nice-looking building. But it's next to something that's much, much smaller. And I think that would be something, and I think the other question there is, depending on the context and depending on the discretion of your design review committee, there's nothing inherently wrong with two-story buildings next to one-story buildings. It has to do with how close they are and whether they have some other design elements in common. We're not trying to make a formula. There isn't a formula. If there was, there'd be more beautiful buildings.
More restricted.
More restricted, yes. That's the problem that we're faced with here in redeveloping this area.
Right.
Is you're going to have the house on the side that's been there forever,
Yes.
and then somebody's going to buy a couple of lots and they're going to build their building next to it. And we're going to try to tell the person building the new house, you really need to make it look like this house built back in the 30s.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Now that
in some communities, and depending on even our own community, when you south of Boulevard and west of Sierra Highway, there are a number of neighborhoods with all sorts of different types of building forms.
Yep.
Different ages, and
we should take another look at this.
It's a matter of taste.
Absolutely. Yep.
Some of your very high-end developments in Southern California and other places have some very mixed architectural styles and neighborhoods and seem to get along just fine in the multi-million-dollar range.
Well, like Little Italy in San Diego, there's a lot of one-story buildings and there's a lot of much taller buildings. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of 20s bungalows mixed in with three-story, brand-new concrete block, nicely designed buildings. So we'll take another look at this page spread and perhaps make it a little clearer. The main focus of this was the zoning, not so much these design guidelines. So we'll give them a little bit more thought and come back with a suggestion of perhaps another way of saying some of these same things. Because sameness is not the goal.
Right. Yeah, I understand that.
Right. Let me add to that too. That's one of the reasons that we're looking towards the form-based approach within these codes, as opposed to the standard conventional zoning where you simply establish setbacks and then as long as you're within setback and height, you can basically do what you want. The form-based code does require that you meet certain performance objectives, for lack of a better term, that refer to build two lines and other things designed to try to integrate the building into the environment that it's located in.
I appreciate the Commission's patience. I only have one more, and it's the one we talked about out in the hallway, and it's the front-out parking. And my note says, why not the boulevard? Would you explain front-out parking for everybody? Because I think it's an exciting idea. 95.
And it was actually, I think we talked about that when we were laying out the boulevard and decided that was maybe one surprise more than people might be up for as the boulevard changed. Because, it was quite a change. And thank goodness most people have liked it quite well. But so the alternative way to do the angled parking is the back-in angled arrangement, which is one of the options, not a requirement, but one of the possibilities that's illustrated in here. And there's a couple potential advantages of that geometry, because, for instance, in normal parallel parking, where you're just parking parallel to the curb, the movement is you're driving along and then in a low-speed environment, because that's not a high speed. You stop, your backup lights come on, then you back in, and then you do the little wiggle thing, if you're good, and you get parked parallel. The back-in angle is simpler. You just stop, you back straight in, you're done. And then the big advantage in certain environments, particularly environments where the street may have certain high volumes of bicycle traffic, is that then, so here you are sitting at your wheel ready to go out of your space. Well, number one, you just look to your left and you can see who's coming, whether it's a car or whether it's a bicycle. And then when it's safe, you just drive out forwards. As opposed to, in some situations, there's always, one of the rules about angled parking when you go in forwards is that there's always a van parked next to you so that you can't see anything when you're backing out. So it's obviously safer pulling out forward, and especially for bicycles, because you can see them and they can establish eye contact with you before you come out into their line of travel. So, and the one other thing is that when the back doors open and the little kids come tearing out of the back seat, the open door is between them and traffic, so that the door tends to herd their little selves onto the sidewalk, as opposed to the parent sort of opening the back door and the kid takes off to the street, and there you are with the back door between you and the kid. So anyway, so both ways work. I think that particularly with generous spaces that are provided for each parking spot on the boulevard with the tree spaces, there's, I think, comfortable room to see, more comfortable than a lot of angled parking situations. And because you're parked in the median, you can actually see the traffic coming better. But the back end would be something to consider, I think, in the future on streets, especially if there's streets where you expect bikes. Anyway,
Asked all my questions.
just an alternative.
I just have a comment, if I could, please. I appreciate you asking that question on the back-end parking, because I wasn't sold on it. In fact, I did not like it initially. But from a safety perspective, I think I'm probably sold now. So thanks for asking that one.
I think either one can, where there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I mean, in both cases, you're stopping in traffic and then backing up and turning. So there's always risk involved. But if it's a low-speed environment, I think either one, that the back end can work pretty well.
See, I envision myself as a 98-year-old woman still driving, because I probably will be. I'll try. And I just looked at that picture and thought, I'll probably just hit the gas thinking I'm hitting the brake and I'll be inside the business.
Oh.
But I think there's less risk of that than the opposite, running down children or somebody on a bike. So I'm sold.
What you have to do is take their license away when they're 91.
Take it from my clutching hands.
Yes.
Well, remember, too, that the right-of-way in the traffic right-of-way takes precedence over the parked vehicle, right? Whether it be a motorized vehicle or a bicycle or any other form of transportation in the right-of-way, they have the right-of-way.
That's correct, yeah. The park vehicles would
I'm not
need to
sure
yield
that,
to the
that all drivers
traffic.
understand that.
Oh, right. And so
Yes.
you can't enter the stream until it's safe.
Right.
Correct.
No matter what you're operating.
Right.
And we'll remember that. We don't want to run over Christopher and his nifty new beach cruiser. It's not really a beach cruiser, is it? What would you call that, Chris?
It's just a road bike.
It's a road bike.
Bigger than a road bike, wider tires. But
Beach cruiser.
Pretty cool. Keeps it locked up. Did you notice he keeps it locked up inside the building? I'm not sure why. Go ahead.
I actually have a comment, just for clarification. When Commissioner Hall started out his comments, he talked about the landscaping. Did you mean zero or did you mean xeriscape? Because I know I've known you long enough on ADC, knowing that you don't like a concrete jungle. So just for clarification, which version, because since they are clearly different.
Drought tolerant.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So plant materials that don't use unnecessary amounts of water, and an overall landscape that's designed with saving water in mind.
That was my purpose of asking that.
Yeah, I think it would be appropriate to add that comment. Yes, thank you. We're not getting to the level of landscape design guidelines per se in here, but as that intent, I think that's a good thing for us to mention.
Well, it's quite an effort, no question about it. So I would expect, frankly, I'm surprised some stakeholders aren't here tonight that have had some input in the past, at least some of the hearings on and public participation events that I've attended. So hopefully...
Yeah, we'll make contact with them again, but I think they're aware of the hearing schedule. So, but as you indicated earlier, they've been involved for a while, so they, I suppose this means that we've addressed many of their concerns, which
maybe
they certainly were willing to express, especially early in the process.
The area, the workshop district zones in the area south of what it would be New Grove in that area.
Yes.
And a whole lot of that area doesn't have public utilities. I mean, it's sewer and water, and those, some of it does, some of it doesn't.
Right.
What consideration did you give, or was that even part of the consideration when
The utility situation per se didn't factor into this because it's zoning. It wasn't a specific plan or a master plan. The scope of the grant that Metro kindly provided, for which we're all grateful, did not extend to the utility systems. That'll have to be accounted for just in the normal course of your utility planning work. And certainly that is it's a funny, patchy, partly developed area for sure, and unfortunately the redevelopment powers disappeared on you. But there'll just need to be planning on a street by street and project basis to make sure that those systems follow development.
The successor agency to the redevelopment agency holds title to a number of parcels.
A bunch of them, yeah, for now.
So,
yep.
With no intent to dispose of them. I mean, they're...
And we did have a lot of interaction with quite a few of the folks that own property and businesses there, and they're certainly aware of those challenges, and I think their general sense was that this direction is probably helpful.
So, Brian, when we get to the point of adopting and recommending the City Council, the general plan amendment, zone change, and so forth, how are we going to deal with those elements, those utility elements and standards of development, baseline standards of development? We're going to conform it to the existing ordinances, or is this going to be a separate way to administer, or do you even...
No, we would be in a position of dealing with it. Unfortunately, the way that we deal there are some other areas of the city where there's development, but not a lot of what I would call supportive infrastructure. One of the city's industrial areas south of L has that situation where, and it's even a private mutual water company, as I recall. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess depends on how you look at it, a lot of times you don't resolve these issues unless the city decides as part of a capital project to move forward, and that may ultimately be the solution in some of this area. If there starts to be a demand for development in this area, particularly if you have the successor agency holding property, it may well be in the city's interest to begin, even on a phased basis, of planning and beginning to install certain utility systems. But it is really kind of beyond the scope of the development regulation to plan that system out at this point, because it's just difficult. The nice thing, though, if we do get this adopted and in place, it would give us some sense, when we look at it from an engineering standpoint, of maybe the scale or type of utility systems that you may need to put, depending on what kind of development levels are allowed within the code.
But that would require some substantial study, particularly, sewer-wide, area-wide sewer studies, sewer-wide, whatever. Am I saying that right? Area-wide sewer studies?
Yes. Thankfully, particularly at the state and even the federal level, development of these kinds of infill sites where you have nearby transportation, nearby facilities like our downtown tend to be favored in many cases by certain kinds of programs that have been developed. So the city we've been fairly successful at managing to locate and acquire those, and perhaps that would be one way to move forward on some of these.
Well, to go through this entire process and come up with the plan as proposed or modified or whatever it turns out to be without consideration to the actual development process. I mean, that's a primary element in this. And we can go through the exercise and spend the grant money, and there it sits on the shelf. That's not the intent here.
I agree.
Certainly wasn't the intent when the downtown plan was adopted, and look what happened. So,
yeah.
Of course, that came about through a $10 million infusion of cash from the agency.
Right.
So,
well, maybe this will just be another thing we put on the wish list for the High-Speed Rail Authority, since they're working hard to make us happy. Or they will be.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. I think I sent you a couple of emails recently on those. Anyway. All right. Anything else from any of the members while we're here? No? All right, then. Thank you, Mr. Sergeant. Appreciate your being here tonight. The recommendation before us is to receive testimony, which we've done, and talk about it among ourselves, and which we've done. There are no implementing action items in this agenda for this particular matter. So, I guess what we would do without objection is to carry this over to the next Planning Commission, regular Planning Commission meeting.
That would be the proper action.
Okay. Does it require a motion, or we'll just a consensus? What would you like, Madam Assistant City Attorney?
The Assistant City Attorney would be more comfortable with a motion.
She would, no doubt. Okay. So then the appropriate motion would be to continue the transit-oriented development zones to the next regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting of July, whatever it is.
So moved. Second.
Thank you.
Excuse me?
You don't want to repeat all that.
No.
I don't blame you.
Sure he does. You suppose that's the appropriate way to do it.
I didn't write it down.
I didn't write down all your comments either, but there were some very good ones. Thank you for doing that. All right. Anything else? Shall we vote? Did we break your voting machine?
Bouncing all over that document.
7-0.
7-0 from the flash of the thing that I saw.
There it is.
There it is. So it will be back on your agenda in July.
All right, thank you. All right, the next item is new business, consideration of revision to the Lancaster Municipal Code concerning regulations for carnivals and circuses. It's item number 5. So, you're asking to be directed to prepare an ordinance based on your recommendation in the staff report, which we reviewed at our planning meeting last week. And individually, we asked a lot of questions, and we got a lot of clarification. Appreciate you doing that. Very extensive. So, what's your pleasure, folks?
Well, number one, I think that we need to define carnival. And I see we have several bullet points over there from different cities. So do we write that now, or do we just...
That definition would be a part of any draft ordinance that we would present to you. Obviously, we need to define what we're attempting to regulate.
So the intent is to regulate the carnivals and circuses, that they're not, as a right, allowed in the community, period.
That's
with potentially certain exceptions.
right. Our recommendation, as once again we discussed a week ago, is that we take the general position that carnivals and circuses are prohibited within the city, and then we carve out of that prohibition certain exemptions for specific situations.
So is it our consensus, or does anyone have any objections to that position, I guess would be a better way to say it. Does anybody have any objections to that?
No.
All right. Well, that's step number one.
Okay.
We only got
So
27
that's
more to go.
the first bit of direction.
Yeah. All right.
So step two would probably be to define the restricted operators.
Well, we have to define what the carnival, but staff would come back to us with what carnivals would be, and I noticed in some cases on page 3 of the staff report, talk about rodeos, other types of exhibitions. There's a whole plethora of a way to define what a carnival is or a circus. Including tent revivals. I don't recall the last one we had in this community, but I'm sure they've existed here before.
There has been at least one that I remember.
Well, maybe Amy Semple McPherson will come back. You think?
Well, I'm going to tell you, if that happens, I'll be giving a lot more weight to whatever her message is, yes.
Well, she did disappear once and did return, as I recall. At least I've read it in the history books. I digress. Okay, I'll be quiet. Let's get serious here. So, are you from all the descriptions and the bullet points on page 3, is there anything in those bullet points that the commission would feel we should exclude from the definition of what a carnival is or a circus is, or a fair or a festival or a revival is? Anybody want to scratch one of those? No, I don't hear. So do you need more direction than that?
We do have, if you go to pages 5 and 6 under the recommendations section, what staff's approach, or what we're looking at, is what we think would be a good idea. Perhaps we could take those bullet points and see if there's anything in those that is not in line with what the commission would feel is appropriate, including, as you get to the bottom of page 6, a definition of carnival that we've put out there as kind of a starting point for you.
Talking about at the bottom, or the next to last paragraph on 6. I looked up what Chautauquas, that how you say that? I had not ever heard of that before. You only remember from what? Want to explain it to us?
It was kind of a traveling event, if you will, that might include speakers and entertainment and other kinds of things. I would say it wasn't exactly the circus coming to town. That used to be a big thing if the train would come in and so forth. But it was kind of where people would get to see traveling speakers or performers of note, and they kind of traveled in a group to these different venues and shows. So
The Lincoln Douglas debate speaks similarly.
This is pre-TV.
Yeah.
And probably pre-radio.
Yes. Yeah, obviously, and that's a good point. When radio began and things, that sort of began to shift. You no longer had to have the in-person kind of an event. I think that probably the closest thing that people in the latter decades of the 20th century, Bob Hope had a traveling radio show that I think actually came to the Lancaster back in the late 40s, as I recall from people who were around talking. That kind of an event. So.
Do you think that calling it carnival, where it says staff recommends definition of carnival, should it just be the one word? Should there be carnival, festival, or is carnival just an overarching type of thing that's going to be what we define it as?
We recommend the one word because it just makes it easier for purposes of readability of the ordinance. So carnival, as defined, could include circus and rodeo and whatever all you wanted, but you're just going to use the one word, the catchphrase carnival, throughout the ordinance. Just makes it easier to read.
What happens if we get a tent revival person that takes exception with being considered an entertainment or a game of chance or skill?
I have no answer for that, Vice Chairman. I don't know what to tell you. You don't have to include tent revivals if you don't want to. We were trying to capture everything that would not be allowed most places, but might be allowed, for example, on church grounds. So that seems sort of like a natural fit. But again, we'll defer to whatever you'd like it to be.
Well, it just seems like carnival has somewhat of a happy type of feeling to it, but there's a certain amount of debauchery that can be in a carnival. And did you like that word, Brian?
Excellent.
Debauchery. Oh, like Toledo.
I think I haven't been going to the right carnivals.
I'll just look at Mardi Gras down in Rio. I mean,
That's Carnival.
Carnival.
Same spelling.
I was just kind of wondering if that might not, in some circles, be considered a pejorative. I'm sorry for the words. I can't help myself sometimes.
My concern with...
I think if you start diluting the words, it just gets...
Yeah.
I would rather start with just defining one word, because I could see someone objecting if you called it a circus too,
Right.
So I think the more words you use, unfortunately, the more there is that. I think there's two things from my standpoint that are reiterated in the staff report, but I'll repeat them. Number one, the more exemptions you carve out, the more possibility that someone's going to find a way to kind of get through on a loophole that maybe you didn't intend. The second thing is, I think the same thing can kind of start happening if you try to define things by different words. I can certainly appreciate if somebody, says, hey, our revival is not a carnival and you shouldn't confuse the two. But for the purposes of a legal definition, I would rather just use one word if I could. That's my opinion.
The option, too, is to, the recommended definition, you could just go with the first sentence and leave tent revivals and large assemblages of people just out altogether, although I don't know if you've been having any troubles with those kinds of events that really aren't a carnival, but they're outdoors on undeveloped lots. If you haven't had trouble with that, then I might recommend you just look at the first sentence and we go with that.
However, the whole purpose of the revision to the ordinance is to
Close loopholes.
fill the loopholes and establish a parameter which we don't currently have. So the broader the description of, or the broader the definition of the word, gives more flexibility to the regulating agency, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And nobody wants to believe we're regulators, but we keep reminding ourselves we are from time to time. In this case, the city council would be the ultimate determinator here of the ordinance, right? Personally, I would say the broadest examples that we can include just gives more teeth to the regulation. I mean, ultimately, had no problem for 50 years, but that doesn't mean on year 51 it's not going to turn into a challenge, particularly on non-owned property, either non-agency owned or assuming whatever reasonable exceptions we want to bring forward, which we haven't even talked about yet.
Another consideration, you could just leave that to temporary events, large assemblage of people, covered or uncovered, and not really include specific large assemblages of people. So you're not including the words tent revival or Chautauqua. Nobody knows what a Chautauqua is. I don't know why I threw it in there, sorry. But you could just leave it as sort of your generic large assemblage of people. And then theoretically that would capture any kind of thing that might happen to take place under a tent.
Would you have to define a large assemblage of people? It's reasonable.
I don't remember where I heard the word Chautauqua before. It finally dawned on this old brain. It was in the play and also in the movie on the Scopes trial, was it not? That'd be right. Where Douglas brought up the word Chautauqua, I think. Anyway, never mind.
That's more trivia than I have.
Really, yeah, this is getting way far afield, sorry. But I know why you put it in there. It fits. And it really relates to revivals.
So would that not be redundant then? Because she actually calls out revivals,
Right.
comma, Chautauquas, which sounds like something to eat to me, but okay, I'll believe you.
I don't know. To me, the broader the better. That just
Agree.
gives. Again, it's the people that have to defend it, who have to.
Yeah, well,
mitigate it,
sometimes it's
potentially are the
helpful
ones
because
that are
you
gonna have
could
to tell
have
us.
that. Someone says, no, it's not that, it's a Chautauqua. And we go, oh, well, that's very different. So.
And I think the connotation of tent revival, I think when anybody hears that phrase, they think religious in nature. And so Chautauqua is a tent meeting, but it's not religious in nature, or at least not necessarily religious in nature. So you try to capture as much as you can.
What's the origin of that word, if I might ask? Because I don't think it's English.
It's a Native American word. I don't know of which origin.
Okay, I was just curious.
So, are we resolved that the broadest definition that you're comfortable with is what you're going to bring back to us?
Is that the consensus of the commission?
Are there any objections? I think so. I think broader rather than narrower.
Very good, that's what we'll do.
So now we're at the point of talking about exemptions.
Sorry, Chautauqua is a resort town in southwestern New York.
But it does come from a Native American word.
Maybe it's Iroquois then, if it's or
Too far northeast.
here you go. Check that.
I'm just getting older. And there I was a history buff. I've been outed.
I just remember it from a play, and I can't even remember the name of the thing. God, or a movie. Maybe it was a movie. Okay, exemptions. What kind of an exemption should we consider, if any? I know you suggested that we use the Alhambra codes and ordinances as a guide. I think you had suggested that in your staff report. Would that be about right, Brian?
Yes, that's the model we were looking at.
Okay. So where's the exemptions in that one? Let's see.
Page 3, bottom.
If I could just clarify, I think the main reason the Alhambra Code was the recommended approach is because it starts from everything's prohibited, and then it starts to...
Okay. So, all right. So the first bullet point on page 4 talks about nonprofits, charitable organizations, and so on. I'm not comfortable with just defining nonprofits, because nonprofits can be established by all sorts of interesting types, folks. So personally, I don't think that in and of itself ought to be an exemption. Others may feel differently.
So, just so I'm clear on what you're saying, so do you mean it would have to either be a 501c3 or just eliminating that altogether?
Yeah.
How about that we have to have the permit, that the fee is waived for nonprofits?
Well, there are certainly nonprofits that I personally would feel that they shouldn't necessarily have a permit to operate a carnival because of their, in my opinion, they're bogus. So if we identify nonprofits as a clear exemption, that just gives us, or gives any and all, the ability to establish a quote nonprofit and operate because they're exempt from the ordinance.
Chairman Bose, how would we differentiate between the nonprofits that are doing good for the community, raising money for a great cause, and those that might be questionable?
It's a matter of judgment. So if you don't, to me it's a matter of judgment. I don't know. I'm not sure how you do it. But you certainly don't want to, to me, you wouldn't want to limit worthwhile organizations as opposed to, one might choose the word non-worthwhile, or the bogus operators.
I'm not sure.
I'm not confident that that our federal government establishing a 501c3 is a good guide. I'm not convinced. Are you convinced?
No, actually, I echo your concern, because several of the events that have raised concerns were in fact a private carnival operator supposedly combined with a 501c3 in some manner, saying proceeds are being given to this organization or that organization. Just the issue or just the fact that something is sponsored or has the involvement of a nonprofit does not guarantee that it does not create a problem of some kind, because we have had that situation. So,
What is the way around that?
I think the way around it is you just don't include that in an exemption. They're just not allowed to operate it. I think you start with 0, and then you slowly build your way out until you get to a level of comfort with the amount of exemptions you have. And I think it makes sense probably to consider city-sponsored or co-sponsored events. Makes sense that those might be exempt. Keep it very limited. Schools and churches, perhaps, on their premises. And then you'll want to carefully consider if you're going to go beyond that, because then you really start to lose a little bit of control.
So what if we establish, as you just pointed out, what if we establish those standards within the ordinance and gave folks an opportunity to file a whatever, not necessarily a conditional use permit or something of that nature, that then that application could be heard by the commission and properly noticed, and public could give their input. So, for instance, if we asked the applicant that was proposing something beyond what's in the ordinance, for instance, we're a 501c3 and we're going to blah, 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 blah. What percentage of your profit, for instance, is going to the XYZ church of whatever? Well, 5%. Well, maybe that's a reason to not grant the application. It's a judgment factor, and as long as it's not capricious, we would have the authority then to deny, right?
That's certainly correct, yes.
So maybe, can you build that in? I mean, would that make sense to people? We could build that in, and then we'd end up having another level of hearing. However, that's what we're supposed to do. I mean, we're supposed to be the buffer between the applicant and the city, right? The city council, right?
That's correct. I'm happy to build that in. Do you want would-be operators to apply directly to the commission? So it would be just the one hearing in front of commission?
Why not?
Okay.
And if that goes south, then we can modify the ordinance.
Good enough.
So at the no fee or permit required, we're going to pretty much wipe out everything but bullet point number 2, and possibly bullet point number 3, and then the 6.
I think we talked about number 4.
Yes, we did.
The fourth one down, I think we talked about including that as an appropriate, or something of that nature, as an appropriate exemption on their own property.
So
churches, schools, that type of thing on their own property.
there's a couple of repetitive things in there, so
Well, true, because they're coming from
we could
different...
drop number 6, school and government-sponsored events, because it's covered in number 4.
Yeah. But I think what Ms. Corbett is suggesting is that, these are just excerpts, so they would write the proposed ordinance to include those elements of civic purpose as well as, and I guess I won't say the word true, but if I did say it, it would be true religious purposes, true charitable purposes, but I didn't say the word true.
Certainly, and again, I think if you're limiting those sorts of purposes to institutions, whether they be religious or educational, that are on their premises, that gives you the control that I think we're all looking for.
Because historically in this community, there are a number of events that take place on various community organizations and churches and schools that, there are festivals and whatever. I mean, there's lots of them in the community, some of which have had to come before us, I think, as I recall, right? Greek festival, for one. We have hearings on that. We had hearings because of protests, I guess it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, they were. Actually, that was the subject of some of the concerns during the CUP hearing, I think, for that.
Okay. Yeah. It's been a while.
Correct.
So stuff on the boulevard would be considered city property, so we wouldn't be concerned about the boulevard and the salute the troops things that they do.
I think if you look at the language, it'll be tightened up a little bit for the ordinance itself at the bottom of page 5, so that it captures not just city, but sort of city-related entities. And then I think that protects all of the, loved events that the city has something to do with putting on, and that would include the boulevard and those kinds of things.
Streets of Lancaster.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And we discussed very briefly last week events that have just incidental uses, incidental rides, for example, but the main focus of the event is a different purpose. For example, pumpkin patches and Christmas tree lots and things like that. If maybe you'd like to give us some direction in that respect, that would be very helpful as well.
I truly thought the pumpkin patch was the one reason we're doing this. So we're going to have to, even if it is incidental, we're going to have some sort of a permit or fee that's going to have to go along with it. I don't think our guy over at the Elks is going to be so happy Dallas is for his tree lot, but as long as it doesn't have incidental, could we leave him alone?
Well, actually, yeah, right now all of those require a director's review through staff. Right now, seasonal sales, essentially. What we would recommend is that anything that's associated with that's clearly accessory or incidental to that main use could be done under that provision, because people generally are not going there primarily for a carnival ride. There's another reason that is the primary reason.
So that, in other words, the definition of carnival expressly does not include pumpkin patch, Christmas tree lot, etc., and then they continue to do the approval process that is already in place for those kinds of events.
And there's nothing we can do to help you with that, with this ordinance?
Yeah, actually, those haven't been issues for us. What have been issues for us have been the standalone carnivals, and on occasion the tented standalone circus. That's been the concern.
And I think, as we discussed previously, the events that take place at the 50th District that are clearly exempt at the fairgrounds.
Yes, definitely.
What other exemptions should we consider?
How about the PEC? Could that be considered a carnival at times?
It's operated under a CUP.
They operate under a CUP right now. As long as they operate within those parameters, they're fine. But yeah, the ordinance as drafted, or as we're recommending to be drafted, would not allow them to take a vacant piece of property and, have a carnival suddenly appear on it.
So they couldn't put a tent in their backyard there and have...
No, not
No backyard?
Not anymore?
Not under,
No. Not that they own.
no.
What about the municipal stadium? What about the Jethawks? That's a successor agency-owned property, right?
Correct.
So the adjacent properties are also successor agency-owned. So if the successor agency wanted to allow a newly defined carnival to go there, then this ordinance wouldn't apply, right?
Not if there's an exemption carved out for city or affiliated types of organizations and property, right? Yeah, the intent is really to apply to things like Poppy Festival or something like that, but I guess in theory, one example, Field of Drafts, if it were to be held on the stadium site.
Right. Well, there would be nothing, as we're talking about, nothing in the proposed ordinance that would prevent the successor agency's property being used for quasi-city-sponsored events. We wouldn't want to limit that.
Right.
It wouldn't pass the test at the next level, I don't think. But.
Yeah, I don't think so. And of course, in theory, since the city has the public interest in mind, it shouldn't, in general, allow its property to be used for something that would be detrimental.
So the appeal process, we talked about the appeal process for the application, and someone who clearly doesn't qualify under the proposed ordinance, they could file an appeal with the commission.
I think they would, the way that I would like to see this work is that, whatever we construct into the draft ordinance that says, hey, if you feel you fall under some kind of special circumstance, you can petition, for lack of a better word, the commission to consider granting you an approval. And then the commission makes a decision. That's appealable, obviously, to the city council. What I wouldn't, though, and it's the same way with anything else, if something is strictly not allowed by city ordinance, it's really not appealable. The things that are appealable are the judgment or determination by a city official, so to speak, or a city agency or board.
Okay. So. All right. Anything else we need to flesh out?
It would be helpful if we had a little guidance as far as there was some comment about permitting or fees or so forth. Do you want to have any kind of fee structure fee provisions for non-city events, or shall we leave that out altogether?
Well, what do we do now for various kinds of applications for use? There is a fee structure for applications now, isn't there?
Yes, for people who apply right now under director's review, which a lot of these things are approved under, depending on the type of use that they're requesting, there's a varying fee structure, and it's based upon the complexity of the request, basically. So
why wouldn't we want to continue that?
Yeah, we could look and see if there's one that kind of fits within what we feel would be the appropriate requirement.
Because there's obviously staff work, and there could be environmental review issues, there could be all sorts of things.
So you think we're getting close to them giving us a document that we can then tear apart and shred?
I think, I don't know, we'll ask. since it's 10 minutes to 8 and we're probably done.
I can have a draft ordinance ready for you for the next meeting.
Great. That'd be in July. Is there any other direction or any other discussion you want to have before we finish with this? Nope. You're good? All right. Okay. That brings us to director's announcements. Mr. Ludicky?
No announcements, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Anything from the members? Commission's agenda? Go ahead.
As you guys know, I'll be going to law school in August in the fall. It'll take me 3 years, so with a lot of sadness, I have to say I have to resign my post as a commissioner. So I've enjoyed serving with you guys greatly. I'll be back in Lancaster. There is a gravitational pull here. There's no doubt about it. So I'll be back, and I'll be with you guys. So it'll be exciting, but I appreciate the time that you've invested in me and me back into you.
Great. We've enjoyed your participation, certainly. And all the best. And that means when you finally get into practice, we all get a little discount? Is that how this works?
We could work something.
Write that down.
Perfect. And I'm getting older, so I'll forget, but you guys will remember. You want to negotiate that now, or shall we wait?
We'll have to a fee structure as well.
Okay, perfect. Great. Well, all the best. All right, public business from the floor, and since there's no public here tonight, we can waive that item. Anything else from the commission? All right, thank you. Good work tonight. So the meeting is adjourned to a special meeting for agenda review on Monday, July 14th, 2014 at 5:30 p.m. here at the, quote, Public Safety Conference Room, used to be the Planning Conference Room here at City Hall.